Heads up, this game is non-canon, so if you're following this series just for the story, do be aware of that. Castlevania Legends was released in 1997 for the Game Boy, serving as a spiritual sequel to both The Adventure and Belmont's Revenge. It's the final Castlevania game for the original Game Boy, which is why I'm choosing to talk about it now. In Japan, Legends is known as Dark Knight Prelude. This is because it's a prequel. Yeah, another one. It takes place in the 15th century, specifically 1450 according to the wiki, though I couldn't get a source on that. That's shortly before Castlevania 3. In fact, the protagonist of this game was most likely meant to be the parent of Trevor Belmont. Or Christopher, remember they were supposed to be the same character originally. It's confusing, I know. Anyways, let's get to it. In this alternate timeline, the Belmonts weren't a long line of monster hunters from Europe, but rather a little-known aristocratic family in Romania. In 1433, a girl known as Sonia Belmont was born to it, and she came straight out of the womb with magic powers. It was said she could see spiritual beings invisible to normal people, a divine blessing, perhaps. Realizing her potential, her grandfather trained her to use his holy whip, the Vampire Killer, in the hopes that she would one day become something more. And when first arose the threat of Dracula, the man who made a deal with the devil, it was her duty to step up. She wasn't really ready to take him on. In 1450, she was just 17 years of age and had just recently met a man named Alucard, the Count's son, which probably made her confused on the idea of killing his dad. But her mansion was attacked by Dracula's forces that year, and her grandfather died in her arms. As his last wish, he asked her to use her powers to protect mankind. For the record, I'm playing this with the Super Game Boy enhancements, which add a little color to the game. Legends opens bombastically with Bloody Tears, one of the best tracks in the franchise. Much like The Adventure, it starts off in a forest/graveyard, though this one is actually haunted with ghosts, which I think is the first time we've seen that. Anyways, on the gameplay. This game is pretty similar to Belmont's Revenge. Movement's good enough, if a little slow. The whip has 3 stages, with the fireball for the last one, and it does not degrade, but it is a little hard to get all the upgrades, which I guess is fine. There's no sub-weapons, but I'll talk more about that later. And the one thing this game has to set itself apart is Sonia's magic. I'll also talk more about that later, since she doesn't start out with many options, but you do have the burning mode from the get-go. There's a special energy bar below your health, and when you press A and B together, you use that to fuel the burning mode. It makes you invincible and doubles your damage, which is pretty fucking cool. It replenishes every time you die, and it's kinda broken because of that, so I try not to use it much. But still cool. It makes you wonder how strong Sonia is compared to other Belmonts. Should I do a power scaling video? No, let's shelve that, I think. Right now though, the most worrying aspect of this game is the level design. I hadn't played this game before starting this series, but I had heard a lot of bad stuff about it, and quite a bit of it was confirmed by my first playthrough. I think this game is pretty terrible. It's not as infuriating as The Adventure, for example, but as you can probably see from my footage, this level design is so fucking bland. Oh my god. The levels in Legends are huge. There's so much walking and so many boring enemies that all feel the same. Belmont's Revenge was awesome. It was fun. It had a lot of cool gimmicks. What happened to all of that? This is just the first stage and I'm already so bored here. And to make it worse, this game was released in the same year as Symphony of the Night, so it likes to fancy itself an exploration game. It isn't too bad in the first stage, but this game has a lot of alternate paths that aren't always useful. A lot of them are just dead ends, which is especially annoying because this game has a timer that's actually kinda strict, and if it runs out, you die. Great. Now, you might be thinking, why on God's earth would you ever want to explore in a classic Vania? Isn't the whole point you just need to get to the end and beat the boss? And well, yes, but this game has collectibles which affect the ending you get. There's one for each stage, and they're hidden in one of the many alternate paths these stages have. The first here, for example, hides the axe in a cavernous dead end. The collectibles are actually the 5 usual sub-weapons that the Belmonts use. Sonia can't use any of them, probably because she wasn't trained to, but the implication is that she passes these weapons down to her descendants so they can use them in the future. I don't know why she has to collect them in the middle of her journey, or why that affects the fucking ending, but okay, whatever. My point is, looking for these is really annoying. But at least there's only 5, and as long as you explore every path the stage has, you should come across them pretty naturally. The enemy selection here, by the way, is really standard with worms, zombies, bats. There's also this boogie. I kept wondering what it was, and the wiki tells me it's a fireball, like a living fireball. What the fuck? The boss of this Norfest is called the Creature's Bat. I have no idea what that means, but it's a werebat type thing like the Death Bat from the adventure. According to the epic lore disclosed in the manual, it's an artificial, fiendish life form, a mix between a bat and a human. So maybe one of Dracula's experiments. It's pretty easy to kill if you have the Fireball Whip. I didn't comment on it last video, but you know, the werebat is pretty standard for vampiric folklore, don't have much to say on it. I do take notice, by the way, of the fucking banger that is playing as I beat it. This game's OST is its saving grace mostly, it has no right to sound as good. Upon beating the legendary Creature's Bat, Sonya absorbs a portion of its power. She unlocks her first soul weapon, Wind. The soul weapons are the replacement for the sub-weapons, and they're Sonya's magical powers that I mentioned before. So instead of finding sub-weapons, you can select your desired power from the menu and use it at will by spending hearts. It's a cool idea, but the soul weapons are really weird. Like Wind here freezes time, so it functions like the watch usually does. But why does it freeze time? What does Wind have to do with that? What does a werebat have to do with that? Unless the implication is that Sonya uses the power of Wind to move so fast that it's like everything else is stopped in time. I don't know. As you're seeing here, the second stage keeps the spooky theme going. We enter the castle into the halls of a haunted library. These big skulls work a lot like the Boos in Super Mario. They only move when you have your back turned. These hunchbacks are really annoying, and I think that's all I have to say, actually. This game is unbearably boring, I'm so sorry. I find a stopwatch here at the top of this climb and proceed. The boss in the library is the Death Dragon, which was apparently slain by Dracula himself and brought back to life to serve him. Holy shit. Dragons, of course, are European mythology. We've already seen a wyvern in Curse of Darkness. The zombie dragon specifically actually shows up in other games. We'll be seeing it again in the future. In Legends, you have to dodge his fireballs and the collapsing ceiling at the same time, which can be pretty tough. Stage 3 is the Clock Tower, which starts you out right in the path of an enemy's fireball, which is always a sign of very good game design. The ice magic, which you get from the dragon, consumes 20 hearts to heal your full health bar. It's the best soul weapon in the game, probably the one I use the most. Not in this stage though, because it was kicking my ass and I kept dying before I got enough hearts, it really sucked. It has a lot of chain climbing through towers, which is slow and annoying, and eventually leads you to a mini-boss. The smaller dragon. Oh man. I tried freezing the smaller dragon, but it doesn't work on bosses. Thankfully, he doesn't have much health. The second half of the stage is where the clockwork actually begins. I took this big detour to grab the dagger, went back to jump through all these snail-paced moving platforms, and then finally got to the top. Death is here, of course, though he's dressing a little differently. This fight is really simple, he just does one thing over and over, but at least it's not impossibly hard. By the way, this game establishes that Death originally gained his powers by making a pact with Dracula, which isn't a thing in the canon Castlevania lore. Pretty interesting. This was a really shitty clock tower. Death drops the flame spell, which is a screen clear type of thing, damages every enemy on screen. It doesn't kill enemies in one hit though, and it's very costly, so I pretty much never used it. The next level is the castle's top floor, with a lot of spiders and knights, which are both really annoying. Seriously, look at this shit. This stage was the first one to have a billion different paths, and also the first one in which I died to running out of time. And I don't know about you, but I think dying because you play the game too much is really fucking stupid. Look at this part. I went all the way to this bullshit alternate path, got to the top thinking I'd find a collectible, but instead I found a healing item. A fucking healing item. I went all this way, took a bunch of damage just to get a healing item that got me back to square one, and then had to backtrack through everything. Fuck this game! This game really likes wasting your time. Some stages have these trap rooms where you walk in, the room closes, and then you're forced to fight a bunch of enemies as they spawn. You're only let out when you kill all of them. And there's no reward or anything. These are there literally only to get you pissed. What is this? This is supposed to be a fucking exploration game, right? You're supposed to encourage your player to explore. Why is there punishment for exploration? Why? The mini boss here is the Medusa, with her whole body like in CV3. I don't think she can petrify you, strangely enough. She just attacks with a sword. When she dies, her head flies off to who knows where. I think this is implying that that's how Medusa lost her body, but she has her body again shortly after in Dracula's curse. The holy water is in the second part of the stage, around these really annoying bats and these crab claws. Oh, sorry, not crab claws, but rather giant worms. I am so sorry to all giant worms out there. I hope you're not offended. I fucking hate this level. I was so done with it. Let's get to the boss and beat the ever-living shit out of her. Oh my. Alucard and Sonia have kind of a romance thing going on. And Alucard, of course, is very worried that this fragile female is trying to take on Dracula, so he tells her to beat it. He actually wants to end Dracula with his own hands, do what his mother would have done and protect humanity. Sonia refuses to leave, of course. She believes her power is fundamental in defeating those of the evil deity. So Alucard tests her. Notice that Alucard here actually has his modern design, not the one from CV3. Again, this game was released in the same year as Symphony, so he also uses his new skills to fight Sonia with a sword and everything. It's a cool boss in theory, but I don't really fancy it. It's clunky, and I found the best way to fight it was by crouching and crawling on the ground as you whip and dodge his attacks. It looks ridiculous. After Sonia beats Alucard, he reacts by saying, "Ow!" He's really impressed, and apparently pretty hurt, so he says goodbye to his beloved and goes off to sleep in his coffin. Which is weird, right? Because in the canon timeline, Alucard is present to help Trevor in 1476, just 20 years later. So he lost to Sonia, went to sleep, woke up for one night to help kill Dracula, then went to sleep again for 3 centuries. Alright, Sonia gets the saint magic from him and the floor opens to drop her deep into the underground. This is the final stage. It also really sucks, and I think the music is kind of annoying and repetitive, unfortunately. There's a lot of water sections that slow you down, with some pretty dangerous fishermen. Nothing too tough, but it was wearing me down at this point. In the middle we fight a jumping demon, which is this funny looking minotaur. I used burning mode to beat it, I don't care. We enter Dracula's cathedral after this, but we're still missing one of the sub-weapon collectibles, and to get that one we need to enter the secret stage. You gotta drop down this path here that really looks like death, but it's actually not, and then you're welcomed into an additional stage for you to have fun with. Yay. This one's a dungeon, it's pretty tough. It's the only one that stays in black and white in this version, which I think is really cool. Unfortunately, the gameplay is not ass. Just a lot of enemies on the screen, nothing much to say. I grabbed the cross and ran out of there, only to find this has an actual boss and it's pretty tough. The Executioner. Big zombie guy with a great axe. This dude has actually showed up in the other games I've covered, but this is the only one where he's a boss. You need to move really precisely around the platforms not to get struck by his axe. I tried using a bit of the soul weapon I got from Alucard here, this energy wave. It's not very useful. It's supposed to be a long-range attack, but the whip already passed that. The energy wave does have the advantage of going through enemies, which is cool, but still didn't need it much. Executioner done. Or executed. From here, Sonia walks back to the end of the cave, and then into the cathedral again. The soul weapon I got from the Executioner is the magic weapon. The magic weapon. It does this cool darkness effect and insta-kills all enemies on the screen, except bosses. It's cool, but it's pretty much the flame weapon from Death, but better. And again, not used too much. We are literally at the end of the game right now, so this weapon sees absolutely zero use. The soul weapons are just bizarre to me. I still think they're a really cool idea, but they're seriously so fucking useless. And to be fair, that's probably got to do with the fact that the Fireball Whip is already really strong, but this wasn't an issue in Belmont's Revenge. The sub-weapons there worked just fine. In Legends, most of the soul weapons are these really niche powers which you mostly don't need, save for the ice weapon which heals your full health bar. They don't see much use, and they don't even make that much sense in the universe. The idea of them, I suppose, is that you use the boss souls as ingredients for these powerful spells, but they don't fit thematically with the bosses you beat. Like I said, stopping time can make sense for Wind if you assume it's just speed, and maybe getting the healing spell from the Resurrected Dragon makes sense too, but why is Death's soul weapon a screen clearer? Is it just because he kills people? But the Executioner's weapon is also a screen clearer, and a better one at that, for the same hard cost? And why is Alucard's soul weapon an energy wave if he only shoots fireballs in a boss fight? Ugh. My main point with this was the soul weapon idea is unfortunately very underutilized. Future games will do similar things, so it's not a total loss, but still a shame. A Belmont getting power-ups from bosses like in Mega Man just sounds really cool on paper. Now, let's get this over with. Dracula and Sonia have a really heated moral debate here, which is weird for a Castlevania. Dialogue in general is weird for a Castlevania, they don't really do that, but this game was clearly very inspired by Symphony. Dracula tries to convince Sonia to join his side, use her powers for evil. Maybe that's why there's two thrones here, but she ain't having none of that, so they fight. And in this universe, mind you, this is the first ever fight between a Belmont and Dracula. This fight definitely takes inspiration from the other Game Boy Dracula fights, in the way he teleports at different heights and shoots fireballs everywhere. And though here, rather than standing up on platforms, he just floats, which I find really funny for some reason. I'm honestly not too sure how to dodge these, I kinda just press buttons and hope for the best. We get a mid-boss cutscene here, which is fucking ridiculous, in which Dracula reveals that wasn't even his final form, so he gets serious. Vampire Killer starts blasting, and we see what is officially referred to as the Prince of Darkness. It seems to be a winged monster made of souls whose dragon-like skull comes loose and warps around the room. It's also not a very good boss, but to Dracula's demise, I beat it pretty easily too. Sonia gets some more dialogue out here. She kinda makes fun of Dracula for throwing his humanity away for this power, which wasn't even enough to beat her. But then he just laughs and claims he'll come back, which of course he will, he always does. He does make an interesting point though. He says darkness will never die out as long as there is light in the world. That's one of the main themes of Castlevania. I could talk about it, but I won't, because I don't want to do that in a video about a shitty non-canon game. Ugh. Like all the future Belmonts will, Sonia watches the castle collapse from the distance. As the woman who first beat the evil count, all by herself, she'll go on in history as a myth, the matriarch of the Belmont clan, and the beginning of the Castlevania legend. If you collected all the items in the game, you get a special post-credit scene showing Sonia's child, destined to carry on her duty as a hero. This would have to be Trevor, of course, or Christopher because of the confusing retcon shenanigans. Interestingly enough, this kid is said to have a cursed fate. It's kind of implied here that the father of this child is Alucard, which is weird, right? Imagine a timeline in which Trevor is Alucard's son and they're fighting side by side against Dracula. I said before this game is non-canon, but that's not the full truth. It was actually officially decanonized by Igarashi when he set the Castlevania timeline. Before that, as far as we know, it was meant to be canon, and I can kinda see why he got rid of it. Legends is weird, it adds this strange prior relationship between the Belmonts and Alucards, and it's just in a really funny place in the timeline. Because Legends being canon would mean that Dracula originally died in 1450, then came back in 76, died again, came back in 79, died again, which is ridiculous, and undermines the whole plot of Dracula's Curse. You know, the point of that game is Trevor's journey to becoming a hero. He's the first Belmont to ever kill Dracula, and the first one to be famous. But then Legends comes around and establishes that his fucking mom did the same thing a little earlier that no one noticed, apparently. Like, the Belmonts are exiled at the start of Dracula's curse. Why would they be exiled if Sonia had just saved the world 20 years before? So yeah, it's a stupid plot. It tries to establish an origin for the Belmont clan, but ends up retconning important stuff. Lament of Innocence does the Belmont origin thing much better. It actually avoids any retconning by taking place way before Trevor, and I figured that's why Igarashi chose Lament over Legends. That being said, I actually kinda like the story of Legends, in a way. Or at least the idea of it, as Sonia is the only female Belmont ever, and she's not canon, which kinda sucks, but more importantly, she's the parent of another Belmont, and that's something that's actually really rare. The Castlevania series often skips multiple generations between each game, and there's very few moments in the lore where you have two protagonists who actually knew each other in life. Sonia here is Trevor's mom, just one generation apart. She possibly even raised Trevor herself, and I think it'd be interesting to explore in-game or in some other material how their relationship was like. So I actually kinda dislike the fact that Sonia was retconned. I think with some tweaking, her story would be really good. Say we get another ReBirth type game that remakes Castlevania Legends and retells Sonia's story. Maybe instead of having her kill Dracula, we can just have her searching for Matthias Kronqvist, because the Belmonts didn't know where he'd gone to after Lament. Maybe she's the one who actually finds out who Matthias is nowadays. Or, if you want to go even crazier, make her fight someone other than Dracula. I actually believe Castlevania needs more villains besides just the one guy. The Castlevania universe has a lot more interesting stuff that could be explored, and Sonia would be a really good opportunity to try something totally different. Maybe another vampire or some other monster like a werewolf. I'm just spitballing here, but Bloodstained is proof that Castlevania can work without Dracula and still be really cool. So that's my take on the story basically. Interesting points, but it should definitely get a do-over. As for the game, same conclusion I think. I really hate this game ferociously. I don't want to play it ever again. It's so mind-numbing. It's not the same kind of bad as The Adventure. That one at least keeps you on your toes. This one is just very slow and methodical torture. If I ever get around to replaying it, I'll probably have a slightly better opinion of it, because I'll actually know how to get around the game's bullshit. But for now, my conclusion is that it sucks. It's just not fun to play for me. Which again is baffling when you compare this to Belmont's Revenge, which was pretty much peak. I mean, come on. If you're gonna make a trequel, it should be, at the very least, as good as the sequel.